If you like games where particularly beefy heroes go around and save the world by overthrowing a reign of terror, you'll definitely like Jewel Master. You play as a rippling man of destiny in a time where the peaceful kingdom of Mythgard has nearly been obliterated by a usurper, Jardine the Mad. Somehow, 12 Masters of the Elements failed in their efforts to stop his takeover, leaving their rings of power behind for the Dark Lord's minions to steal for themselves. The task at hand is to track down the lost elemental rings, master their powers, and wield them to overthrow Jardine once and for all. It seems easy enough in principle, but if 12 experts failed to halt the big bad and his legions of evil, I'm not so sure what kind of chance we're expected to have here. I wanted to take a moment to mention the box art differences for the North American and Japanese releases. I feel like the artists for the North American one went a little too literal with a giant bejeweled hand. If nothing else, it's a very honest and literal depiction of a warrior trouncing evil using ring power. On the other hand, the Japanese art is absolutely gorgeous, albeit a little misleading. I can appreciate the sense of adventure and curiosity this image invokes. My question is, where is this guy on the cover in the game? The protagonist is actually a dude wearing a fighter's outfit and a bandana, blasting monsters to death with his ring magic instead of this noble swordsman. You do eventually get access to a sword and storm a castle, but there's something about the Japanese artwork that feels dishonest, like it's meant for a quiet turn-based RPG with a maiden to save or something. It's still my favorite though. The control scheme deserves all the praise in the world. One button jumps while the other two were assigned to a magic spell for each hand. The default setup puts both spells side by side and jump on one end, which I changed immediately since it didn't click with me. While you can equip two different spells and use them freely, there's never a time when you'll need to press both buttons simultaneously. Having jump all the way on one end felt impractical and confusing for me, so I put it on button B with the spells for each hand on either respective side. This helped me immensely in hectic moments where I didn't have much time to think. Unfortunately, having a logical button layout couldn't save the character control itself. It's not great, with movement feeling almost as stiff as this guy's upper body when he walks. There's something laborious about the base movement speed and jumping height. You can never quite make it over most enemies, and so many monsters rush up on you that it's a rarity to ever avoid damage completely until you've memorized where foes pop up from. On the bright side, the level design is fairly low stakes, with stages mostly consisting of solid ground with an occasional vertical section mixed in. I'm hesitant to even call Jewel Master a platformer, since jumping's hardly a focus until stage 5. Most areas feel suspiciously safe, with difficulty coming from fighting off hordes of monsters that are constantly trickling in. There's a complete lack of instant death pits to fall into, no tricky little areas that require perfection to get through, and no surprise alternative game modes to nail down. It's all very samey from start to finish. There are always exceptions, and there was one nasty concoction of character control and level layout that I was never quite able to conquer: going down the stairs. I use the term stairs loosely since it's truer to say that in most stages, staircases were actually a bunch of regular platforms stacked on top of one another, masquerading as the real thing. It's just about the furthest thing from stairs in other games that you actually climb in a way that's reminiscent of real life. To drop down a step in Jewel Master, you had to press down and jump as if you were falling through a regular platform. The issue is that many had two flights with a turn in the middle, usually with a giant enemy waiting at the bottom. It was nigh impossible to cleanly pass all the way through to the ground without getting hit at least once, since dropping through all these little platforms was extremely slow. This feels like a case of a game feeling frustrating for the wrong reasons, and I think a bit more polish on this aspect or even kinder enemy placement would have gone a long way to smooth this out. Now, the only way to attack anything in Jewel Master is by slipping on some rings and firing off their powers at enemies. If you have nothing equipped and wave your arms around, your fists do nothing but this neat dance. Unfortunately for our lovely protagonist though, his moves are completely inoffensive, literally and figuratively. Anyway, the thing that drew me to this game in the first place was its proclaimed spell combinations when pairing up different rings. The manual lays out a list of moves, but a really nice touch was how they're also named above each hand when you equip a ring or two. There's no need to unlock spells through experimentation or memorize a thing. Having this information on display at all times was refreshingly straightforward, which is always a treat in games with multiple movesets like this. In terms of what's on the menu to use, there's a little bit of everything here. offensive magic, some defensive spells like Barrier that I'm not really convinced does anything, and a handful of options that change walking speed and jumping height. Switching to a high jump is mandatory in a couple of places, but I didn't use that outside of those circumstances since it would have replaced a second attack option. In my typical fashion, I preferred to play offense first and foremost, a strategy that worked pretty well. I also loved that casting magic was instant with the tap of a button. I've played a few games where spells have to be charged up before release or even cycled through and timed perfectly. A case of the latter is the Sega Genesis port of Kadash while playing as the mage, where using magic felt excruciating, to put it lightly. The ability to blast off as much magic as I wanted as often as I liked helped to balance out some of the shortcomings in character movement and level design I mentioned earlier. While you're spoiled for choice in Duel Master, it didn't take me long to gravitate towards a few favorite spells. Wave and Fire Viper were my primaries, and most importantly, both distance options. Melee attacks were pretty useless here since most enemy hitboxes are questionable at best. You'd think a fiery fist to the face would be a guaranteed method of inflicting serious damage, but my character's fists passed right through enemies regularly. The bigger issue was how many hits things took to kill, since it was rare that monsters died in a single blow when using lower level magic. Most regular monsters could require up to 6 hits, making distance attacking in early game more of a requirement than an option. I will say that in later stages, running into enemies that put me through the ringer in stage 1 and subsequently crushing them with a max level attack was extremely satisfying. This gave me a real sense of character progression in a game with few other metrics to measure such things, but it doesn't really excuse how ineffective close-range fighting feels in the earlier parts. Something I found strange is that for a quest with such a huge focus on ring pairings and their elemental compatibility, enemies weren't susceptible to those forces in any exploitable way. Throughout the game, you visit 4 areas roughly tied to each element with beasts that are also on theme. Using fire on an ice enemy didn't seem any more effective than hitting them with a water spell. So many games lean heavily into a rock, paper, scissors approach of strengths and weaknesses, which can sometimes make gameplay feel forced or contrived. Having autonomy to decide how I fought was wonderful, even if I sometimes felt like that person who spams the same tactic and never tries anything else. You might be wondering what the point of even having different attacks is, and there's actually quite a bit of strategy to be found here. Other than being distance or melee, each magic spell had differences in speed, damage, and range. For example, something like the wave attack was great for quickly covering a large amount of the screen and could also be shot vertically. Its drawback was that it was generally weaker. A stronger weapon with a different strategy altogether is the Fire Viper. I didn't use it much at low level since it only had a short range at the player's feet, but it became extremely powerful later on. It was great for incinerating anything on the ground because it doesn't stop when it hits its target and could also be dropped to attack things below. I used these 2 weapons the most because I would wield them with purpose and intention, giving me complete control and not having to pray and spray my attacks. I'm sure if someone took the time to memorize this game, they could identify the best weapons to be used in every situation without a doubt. The monsters you're up against sit firmly in the mythical creature category. The manual comes complete with a bestiary of the enemies whose butts you're going to kick with your ring powers combined. This is one of my favorite things to find in a video game manual, especially when all the artwork's original, rather than the usual supplied blurry screenshots. I really love the anguish on the face of this bowling fish, and I've spent a long time trying to figure out whatever the heck this Gagarages is supposed to be. The pixel art for these beasts already stood proud and tall on its own, but seeing these drawings helped my imagination stretch out a little bit further. There are a couple of instances of palette swapping and repeats as you work through to later levels, but having new monsters to freeze and fry kept the long trek on the way to Jardine's castle gratifying. Well, that was until the boss of the 4th stage really knocked the wind, earth, fire, and water right out of me and stopped my progress dead for hours on end. In general, the boss fights are easily managed. The hardest part about them is the amount of continues you get can be counted on one hand. This might seem like a lot, but each of the 5 consists of a single health bar. When all of those run out, it's back to the start. Every one of the bosses hits like a truck on normal mode, and a couple of wrong moves added up too quickly for my tastes. Compared to the encounters that come before and after it, the 4th stage boss was absolutely maniacal on the evilness scale. Its second form was unimaginably ruthless with how fast and wildly it moved. There was a pattern to learn in there somewhere, but it was hard to get much practice in. Every time I lost a life, I had to play the entire level again, only to see the boss for 3 seconds before getting frozen midair and breaking the sound barrier. I endured many failed attempts before I finally bit the bullet and dropped the difficulty down from normal to easy. While the manual doesn't really detail the differences between each difficulty level, easy mode seemed to decrease how much damage I took with each hit. Now, since I played this game with no hints or guides, I didn't put together a sound strategy that would have crushed this boss with 2 measly hits. With the hindsight that I now possess, I know for a fact that I could very easily beat this game on normal mode and have since gone back to do so without the cameras rolling. If you decide to play this and find yourself stuck here, don't be afraid to experiment a little. I won't spill the beans on what the trick is, but I will say that slapping this jerk around and seeing him blow up in a glorious, flamey explosion was the highlight of my entire playthrough considering how much trouble he caused me. If there was one aspect of this game that truly confounded me, it was the health bar. You start the game with 2 dots on the gauge, and when you're at full health, they're green. As you take damage, the dots change color and eventually become gray when they're empty. My problem was not being able to tell how many hits from an enemy each dot represented. Sometimes monsters would clearly hit me and my health bar wouldn't budge, and other times I'd get hit and lose a huge chunk. There's no way to measure or predict this, and I would have much preferred a numerical value or a longer health bar that represented my health as a continuous line. Like many other games I've played, the difficulty at the beginning had me biting my nails way more than the end since there was so little health to work with the exception of that awful boss I mentioned earlier, of course. While there aren't any ways to increase defense through additional armor, the life bar can be lengthened by freeing a fairy friend in each stage. According to the manual, they'll pay you back with special gifts for helping them, but what that really means is that you'll absorb their life essence and re-imprison them as an extra blob on your life gauge until the end of time. I'd also like to know who decided that all of these entities we assimilate are supposed to be fairies. I see Santa, a fireball, and the guy that drives the boat on the river Styx. Only one actually looks like a stereotypical fairy. It's a little baffling unless I'm just out of touch on fairy lore. Anyway, this is as good of a time as any to mention that these friends are completely missable, and so are some of the rings if you're not careful. It's worth it to make sure to explore the stages thoroughly and kill every enemy at least once so that you don't accidentally move on without finding them. Trust me, you'll need all the help you can get. The graphics in Jewel Master were pretty impressive. I've already commented on our protagonist's stiff walk cycle, but the environments had a lot of visual interest to behold. The outdoor portions of stages 1 and 3 were especially nice, with their detailed, layered backgrounds that created a nice sense of depth. The indoor locations were more of a mixed bag. Some places were chock full of textures and features, while others were kind of boring. A large stretch of Stage 2 where you spend time in some ruins is pretty much Browntown with lots of bricks and blocks and plain walls with no decoration on them. These are a pallid comparison when you consider something like Jardine's Castle towards the end of the game, with its ornate archways, towering windows, and beautiful stained glass. Even with the pendulum swinging pretty far in both directions here, I'd say overall, this was a very good looking game. The music's quality could more or less be split exactly down the middle into 2 piles, finger-snapping goodness or pure mediocrity. I'm not really sure how they managed to crank out several tracks that easily rose to headbanging territory along with others that floundered around like something you'd hear at the grocery store. The good songs are great, but the rest are completely forgettable. Jewel Master was a very entertaining slice of the Sega Genesis library. It has an innovative combat system that implements a neat twist on a familiar formula, as well as a relatively linear difficulty apart from that one nasty boss I keep bringing up. It's also made of the kind of rewarding challenge that only persistent players have the pleasure of overcoming, something that I really appreciate in games from around this time. I'm genuinely surprised that Jewel Master's greatness is not shouted about from the rooftops, since it goes well beyond the expectations of a game that's merely serviceable. There's lots of fun to indulge in, as well as some replay value in perfecting the game at higher difficulties. While it's not perfect, this game gives you all of the feel-good power you could want at the tips of your fingers.